On this lesson, we're going to study the Internet Protocol address, commonly the IP address. So first of all, what is an IP address? Well, it is essentially a set of hosts connected to each other through layer 1 or layer 2 devices. So here we have three sets of hosts. We have this network, and this network. And in between we have the router. The router is the interconnection device between two or more networks that can use different technologies. So the IP address is a number. It is a 32-bit number. Okay, so essentially it occupies 4 bytes. It is represented as 4 decimal numbers of 8 bits each, separated by a period. For example, here we see, okay, an IP address. Okay, this here number in red is an IP address. How do we know that? Well, we have here 4 decimal numbers, okay, and they are separated by a period. And since here we have 8 bits for the representation of these decimal numbers, we have from the range 0 until 255. Now, some people may ask, can we represent the IP address with 32 bits, essentially 32 values of 0 or 1? And the answer is yes. We can simply transform this number, okay, into 32 bits. However, this is usually not done, and IP addresses are usually not presented in this way, since the decimal representation is far more readable. So along this course, we are going to use this most used IP address representation. Okay, so we already know what an IP address is, we already know its format, and now we also need to know the parts of any IP address. So in addressing, two identifiers are defined. Firstly, we have the net ID. This is the network identifier, so we can know to which network this IP address belongs to. Okay, so different networks should have different net IDs. And then we have the host ID. This is the host identifier. So suppose we have a network and we have multiple hosts inside this same network. Well, these different hosts must have different host IDs. And also, since they belong to the same network, they must have the same net ID, the same network identifier. So the net ID and the host ID together in this order, first the net ID and then the host ID from left to right. So something to take into account here, and that is very important, is that the IP address is always 32 bits. Always, always, always. However, the number of bits for the net ID and the number of bits for the host ID can change, so they are configurable. Okay, so very important, depending on the case, depending on the problem that we're solving, we will have a number, okay, for the net ID and also a number of bits for the host ID. But always the sum of them is going to be 32 bits. But here, this is only an example. Not always the net ID will be 20 bits, and also not always the same way 12 bits will be for the host ID. These numbers can vary. So as we've said, since it is not feasible and also not important to represent IP addresses that are not readable, okay, we will always represent IP addresses in a very readable format. So here we will always use the decimal representation instead of the binary representation. As we can see, this first value here, decimal value 872, is a number in decimal that we can represent with 8 bits. Right, in fact here 872 is this value here, right, in binary with 8 bits. For instance, if we have all ones, in the 8 bits we have all ones, this is the number 255 in decimal. Now, how can we recognize the net ID and the host ID part of an IP address? Well, we have two ways. The first way is using masks. We are going to learn mask and study mask on the following lessons. This is the most used ways to recognize the IP address. And the second way is using the classes. This was the original method when the Internet Protocol was being developed. Again, the most common one is masks, so we are going to study both, but the most important one that we are going to study is the masks way. So, on the following lesson, we are going to study masks, and with this, we end this lesson on the IP address.